Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Currently doing a series of videos that I try and do most shopping trips, but have missed the last couple. Daily videos post our 2-monthly grocery shop, 6 to 8 weekly grocery shop, that show what I do each day over sort of the 10 to 14 days following the grocery trip to make sure that all the food that I bought gets processed, used, and preserved accordingly so that it lasts us the 8 weeks. So there's a lot of processes behind shopping that extended sort of a period. Fruit and veg needs to be dealt with or stored appropriately so that it lasts for the 8 weeks, and meat needs to be done the same and things like that. To a degree, it requires some portion control as well to make sure that you've got stuff that's going to last you that period of time and all that sort of stuff. And everyone's always interested in it, so I try and do a bit of a run of videos so that I can show you what I do in those days. The days are very full. Doing the daily videos makes the days even fuller, but it is worthwhile. It's great for documentation for me as well, because each time I do my groceries, I do a little bit of a pantry inventory and a stock run of everything that I've got. I have shown it before. I don't think I showed it before this trip though, but I have a spreadsheet that I use, like a little data sheet that I use that has what I like my base amounts of each product to be on the shelf, what I've got left, and how many I need to bring it back to that base level. So I do that each month, and I have those sheets each month to compare what I do. I also have a spreadsheet with all the pricing from Costco and Aldi and all the rest of it from month to month, which I will eventually get up on the website so that people can see the comparisons of price increases, dollar per 100 grams between the different stores and things like that. The website is something that I'm working very hard on, but it is very time consuming, and at this point in the month I don't have a whole lot of time. But the point is that if I spend all this time now at the beginning of the month, then later in the month I have more time to do the other stuff. So I badly need to make up some more liquid and bar soap, shampoo bars, things like that. The gardens need a lot of work, and I need to get the website going and all my affiliate links and everything updated. Someone let me know that the Amazon links aren't working in the description at the moment, so I need to get that fixed as well. I'll try and get a couple fixed for this video, but in the end I'll probably have them all on a website so that people can access them from there, because it's probably the easiest thing to do. And then all the affiliate things or all the products I recommend and stuff can go on there as well, easy access for people, so that they can use the links which will benefit me for like I make a commission off stuff, but also potentially give you discounts as well. So we'll get that sorted, and then it will be easier to access. So today's video though was using up some more of the veggies that needed to be used. You'll have to excuse the fans come on in the inverter behind us. I mentioned this to people who've been around. I'm underneath my secondary solar array because it's away from the children and the dogs, and there is an inverter in here and it's been really hot, so the fan kicks in, and that's what you can hear in the background. So today was, what did we do? We did some more canning. We finished off the lard. We made sourdough pasta and had pasta for dinner and all that sort of stuff. So come along and see what we got done today, and I will see you again on the next one. So the first thing I did when I first got up in the morning was I turned that pot on. So the pot from yesterday that I'd put all the cracklings back into, I had left sealed, like it's a pressure cooker, so it was nice and sealed, left it on the stove so that I could turn it back on today. So first thing I did when I got up was I went to the bathroom and I turned that pot on out in the kitchen so that it could start its simmering. I wanted to leave it for a few hours because I wanted to get just as much as possible out of that end of that fat. So as we discussed yesterday, this fat is going to be quite odorous, quite flavoured, and quite dark compared to the other ones, because we're cooking down those cracklings and we're actually cooking them, not just rendering them. But that's fine, because as discussed, there's plenty of uses for the fat, and so the slightly more odoriferous and tasty, flavorful fat is great for frying things in, and for using in savory dishes and stuff as well. So I put it on for a few hours, and we used a flour sack tea towel like we did with the pineapple cordial. We used that in the end to try and get as much fat as possible. We're just trying to get as much as possible out of this batch. It's so much work and so time consuming and so messy that you just want to do the most you possibly can out of out of it. Well, we do anyway. So as I said yesterday, we ended up with 18 jars. So there was 4 jars out of this batch today. There was 4 jars out of the second batch yesterday, and there was 10 jars out of the very first batch yesterday as well. So 18 jars all up, 4 extra jars by doing this today, which is nothing to sneeze at. Like that's a considerable amount of extra fat for very little extra work. We kept the cracklings. They can be used for a variety of things. You'll see some over the next couple of days, but we will just freeze a lot of them because they can be used. You can even sprinkle them in your soups. They add some quite nice flavor into a soup. They tend to sort of just get soft and become texture in your soup, but they add flavor. The dogs like them as a treat. The chickens like them as a treat. So we just keep them and we use them accordingly. They go quite dry too, but when you do use them, you tend to fry them off. So if you're going to use them as a topping for something or as a crispy, because I minced my fat on a really fine grind, they won't crackle up quite like crackling that was in little cubes. They are a bit softer because they are so small, I suppose, but if you fry them off in a cast iron pan, then that last little bit of fat will go out of them too, and you end up with little crunchy, tasty, meaty bits. You do have to add some salt. They're pretty tasteless without salt, but so is crackling for that matter, so you know. But they're, you know, we try and use everything, and that's the whole point, is we're just trying to use it all rather than it going in the compost. And worst comes to worst, it gets fed to the chickens. Good protein source for the chickens, good fat source for the chickens, so they will enjoy it if that's what it comes to and we need the space in the freezer. After we got all that done, or during, at some point, I put on some chicken stock. So I used the bones from the 4 kilos of chicken thighs that I had deboned right at the beginning of like just after I brought them home. So I've got all the bones from those chicken thighs. Now I'm not particularly precise when I'm deboning them because I know that this is what I'm going to use them for. So I used all the bones in the pot. I used a couple of onions, some celery tops that I'd put in the freezer, some carrots that we had in the freezer, and a bit of garlic, a bit of salt, and some peppercorn, some apple cider vinegar on the bones to help with the goodness of the bones to come out. My mind blank here. So I pressure cook this for 90 minutes. So I use my pressure canner, which can also be used as a cooker, and have it under pressure for 90 minutes. At the end of the 90 minutes, the bones are so soft that you can just mush them into a paste in your hands, and that's what we're aiming for. While that's on and going, I moved on to other things. So Darryl had requested a pasta dish for dinner. He still has some of his baby octopus that I bought him while we were shopping left, and we have half a dozen prawns, raw green prawns frozen in the freezer from Christmas time, because we buy 1 5-kilo box of raw green prawns at Christmas time. That's the only time we really buy prawns because they're an expensive per kilo meat, and we dole them out in small batches between over Christmas time, and we happened to have some left, and he had those baby octopus, so he requested pasta. So I made some sourdough pasta. I do 100 grams of starter with 400 grams of plain flour, 3 eggs, and 60 grams of oil. I bring it together in the Thermomix or in a food processor or whatever you want until it's into the little balls, and then I tip it all out onto a dough mat and bring it together better on the dough mat. I did 3 batches of these. Because it's sourdough pasta, I want it to sit on the bench for an hour or 2, and it softens. I do have a whole video about the sourdough pasta, so you can check that out if you want, but it ferments slightly is what you're going for, so the structure of the dough changes slightly, so a couple of hours on the bench, and then I stick it in the fridge. It can stay in the fridge for multiple days. It's the same as anything, like, you know, when you make mayo, it can live in the fridge for a week because your eggs have that sort of a shelf life on them. The dough's the same. So once it's fermented to my liking, I stick it in the fridge, and it can be a couple of days before I get to it sometimes. I made 3 batches of that and did that for it. So the other thing I needed to use up was the carrots. So yesterday we had, or the day before, whenever it was, the carrots that Darryl had peeled for me. We grated a whole bunch of them up and froze them in bags of grated carrots to use for a variety of things, but I kept a bowl of them out as well, and today I diced them up into little cubes. I also had some potatoes left in those bags that had some rotten potatoes in it, so we still had some potatoes that needed to be used, those really cheap ones that I got. So I peeled them and diced them up into little cubes as well, and then decided to make some more soup base. So this one's going to be straight vegetable soup. I like to use a jar of the meat soup and a jar of vegetable soup and a jar of stock. It tends to be what we need for the family. So we've got 3 jars in the pot: stock, vegetables and meat. 2 vegetables and meat if we've got surplus of them, but vegetables on their own is fine too. So I had just made that stock, so I strained that stock so that I could use it for this batch of soup. So I filled the jars with, I did the normal in the bottom. I did diced celery, onions and garlic first and put a couple of tablespoons of that in the bottom, and then added carrots and potatoes to the top of the jar. Then I topped it all up with my chicken stock. Now my chicken stock I don't skim. So a lot of people, when they make stock and when they're canning, they want to reduce the fat content. So they would refrigerate their stock, and then after it was refrigerated, they would skim all the fat off the top and then use the lean stock. I don't do that because I really like the flavour of the fat in the soup. So all I do is that I just give a little more generous headspace on the jars, because that fat will bubble up. You will get some siphoning, generally speaking, so you just be a little more generous with the headspace and be aware that it is likely to siphon, but I'm okay with it to keep that in the soup personally. So I filled the jars with the fresh chicken stock and then debubbled them. You want to make sure you debubble when you've got little tiny cubes of things like this, because that will adjust the liquid level, and then you adjust your headspace accordingly, because you don't want your level too far under the vegetables. I don't think I added anything else in these. You can add a bit of salt or herbs or whatever you want, but I prefer to leave them plain because I don't know what I'm going to turn them into. Like a jar like this would make a perfect chicken pot pie or non-chicken pot pie, but if I have a jar of chicken on the shelf, I could use the shredded chicken with this and make chicken pot pies and things like that. So then I would add the flavors for chicken pot pie when I made the roux with the stock that's in the jar. So I'd pour the stock off, make the roux, add all the veggies and chicken, and then I've got chicken pot pie, things like that. So I don't like to flavor things too heavily because I don't know what I'm going to use them for. You also have the issue that some herbs and spices and stuff go a little bit bitter when they're cooked for, well, these jars are no meat in them, so it's 75 minutes plus the 20%, so it ends up being 90 minutes, but the ones with meat in them are 108 minutes. So it's cooked for a long time, so the veggies end up quite soft, which is fine because we like them soft in a soup. And sometimes I've even been known to like puree the vegetable jar so that it's really thick, and then add it to the meat and vegetable jar, and then that changes the texture of the soup too, especially in winter. And then you can dip your bread and it's a nice thick sort of a vegetable soup. So yeah, I like to leave things fairly plain on the shelf so that I have the options once it comes off the shelf to make it how I want to make it. The kids really like pasta in their soup and things like that, so sometimes it's nice to not have any obtuse flavors in the jars because it would not taste as nice if it was turned into pasta, things like that. So anyway, I sometimes add some salt, sometimes add some flavorings, but generally speaking I don't add anything to these because I would prefer to do it when I open the jar. Personal preference though. So all the normal things: clean the rims with vinegar, put the rubber rings on. These are Fowler's for cola jars. They're 1200ml jars, size 36. So I clean the rings with vinegar as well, clean the insides of the stainless steel lids with vinegar as well, put them on, put the clips on. All standard practice for canning, and I've done it quite a few times over the last few videos, and I do have some videos that outline canning on its own, which you can go back and look at if you want, but feel free to ask any questions in the comments as well. So these go into the canner. Now there is some variability in canning time for this sort of thing. Basically you want to can it for the item that's in the jar that takes the longest to can, but which would probably be onions and potatoes. I think are both 40 minutes in canning time off the top of my head, but I'd have to check that. But from looking around, most people sort of stick to 75 minutes for a vegetable soup. I suppose that leaves variability for what's in it. So I just went with that because I really don't mind if the veggies are a little overcooked. And if I'm canning it with meat, I normally do it for the 90 minutes anyway. Now, because these are 1200 ml jars, the 75 minutes is for a quart size, which is 900 to 1000 mils. So I did these, I added the 20% on, did them for 90 minutes. So these vegetable soup jars were done for 90 minutes at pressure. I use a 15-pound weight for mine. All right, so that was done. After, I think that was canning at the time, I pulled one of the batches of sourdough pasta out to roll out because that's what Darryl requested for dinner. So I like when people request things for dinner because then I don't have to think about it. Anyway, I pulled the pasta out and rolled it out. So I use my KitchenAid roller for my pasta. I just have the flat attachment for rolling it out. I have never bought it's actually not even the KitchenAid brand. It's a generic brand that I got off Amazon. And there is a cutter one that you can get too, but I didn't feel that it was efficient because you'd either have to roll all the sheets out and then run them through the cutter, or you'd have to swap it out all the time. And because it's sourdough pasta, it doesn't form quite the same skin as a standard pasta, and it's a little more fragile. So leaving it to sit, it tends to stick to itself. But anyway, so I just run it through the flat side. I started at 8, I fold it in half to get the air out, and then I run it through all the way to side 2 or 1 being the smallest, the thinnest on this particular roller, and then I hand cut it. So I have a little wavy pastry cutter thing, and I just use that to cut it. And I have this wooden pastry drying rack, which I really need to replace because anything wood in our environment is pretty sucky. It gets discolored and kind of gross. So I have seen that there's some plastic ones and some stainless steel ones, or I need to rig something up. So I can only fit 1.5 batches of pasta on this rack anyway, so it's slightly inconvenient regardless. But I only rolled out one of the batches because that's plenty for us for dinner. It's more than enough for us for dinner. The kids had some of that as well, and left the other 2 in the fridge, and I'll get to them in the next day or 2 when I get around to it. So they can stay in the fridge for the next few days, so which is fine. We discussed that earlier. So I rolled it all out. Surreal is in the background of this shot here, and she is pureeing the dog food. So like I said about the stock, once you pressure cook it for 90 minutes, the chicken bones, you can just squish them between your fingers. So what we do is we then puree it into a paste with all the vegetables and everything in it for the dog food. Now, if I was making the stock purely for dog food, I could have put some brown rice in there. I could have put some sweet potato, pumpkin, zucchini, all that sort of thing in there as part of their food. But I wanted the clear stock for the soup that I was making, so I didn't want to put any of those other things in there, only because it discolors the stock. It makes it very cloudy and very dense, and that's fine, and we use it that way, but it doesn't strain very well, and it strains much better without that stuff in there for using for canning. More of a clear liquid than a cloudy liquid, so I didn't want to add any of that in because I knew I was going to be using it for canning. But normally, if we're using it then and there, or if it's making dog food, we add a lot more vegetables. And if it was only for dog food, then great big chunks of sweet potato, pumpkin, all that sort of stuff go straight in, and they get pureed up as well. That's all pureed up, put in the fridge for the dogs. We serve it with their dried kibble, the proper kibble that we buy from the feed store for them. Then we did dinner. So all that's done. We've got the pasta sorted. So we're going to do dinner. The kids requested basil pesto pasta, which I've made quite a few times. I show it on the channel. There's a short for it, but I haven't made it quite a few times. We use 6 egg yolks with 2 jars of the pesto, which I would really love to make my own eventually. That'd be really nice if I could ever get some plants growing. But anyway, we're using Aldi pesto. 6 egg yolks, a bit of lemon juice, a bit of olive oil, a bit of cowboy candy, and you mix that all up in the bowl. Then you cook your pasta off. I let them choose whichever pasta they wanted. They wanted the spaghetti. Sometimes they have spirals, whatever else. They don't generally have the sourdough pasta just because I don't have the capabilities of making enough to comfortably feed everyone easily. Not the space to hang it all and the time to do it, and they're not really that fussy. I'm the one who's fussy. I'm the one who likes the sourdough pasta. They are quite happy with the dried pasta that you buy from the store, and because they're happy with it, then that makes it easier for me as well. So They're having dried spaghetti that you cook in the pot, and then when it's hot you pull it straight out of the pot and put it into your egg yolks and stuff, and it cooks the sauce with the heat of the pasta. Add a little bit of the pasta water if you need to thin it out, if it's a little too gluggy, and the egg yolks and everything turn into this lovely creamy sauce. We went really simple today, and I had some of the smoked sausage that I made a couple of weeks ago. That was in the freezer and chopped up. I fried that off in the cast iron to heat it up and stirred that through the pasta. Sometimes we add greens, sometimes we add veggies, sometimes, you know. Today we didn't. We had smoked sausage and pesto pasta. After I served that up for them, I made Darryl's dinner and mine. So, as I said, Darryl had requested a tomato base, like a marinara pasta, using the baby octopi that he had that I bought him during the shopping trip. So I found that there were some prawns in the fridge, so I pulled them out, defrosted them. He peeled them for me while I was doing other things, chopped them up, chopped the baby octopi up. He eats the baby octopi whole, but I don't like them. I like them chopped up, thank you very much. And even when I'm serving it, I tend to give him the big head bits, and I'll just have a few tentacles here and there. So I did basically the same as what I did for them with the basil pesto, but with sun-dried tomato pesto, and I added it to the pan. So I cooked off the pasta, added the sun-dried tomato pesto to the pan, added a little bit of coconut cream, and made sure that all the seafood was cooked through, and then I added the pasta to the pan, and then I normally add a couple of egg yolks to the pasta afterwards to cook through, like to take the pasta off the heat, add a couple of egg yolks, which thickens up the sauce and makes it that lovely rich sort of a flavour. So we had that with the sourdough pasta for dinner, and it was divine. The sourdough pasta is effort, but man, it's worth it. It has this lovely, silky, fantastic mouthfeel to it compared to a dried pasta. There's nothing wrong with dried pasta, but it really doesn't live up to sourdough pasta. But as I said, that's just me being fussy. So after dinner, the jars were finished for the vegetable soup, so we pulled them all out of the canner and put them on the bench for their 24-hour cool down. The jars will sit on the bench for 24 hours, like for overnight, and the next morning I will clean them and label them and assess them for their seals. So the cooling down process is all part and parcel of the process of your jars sealing. So you can't assess the seal on them then and there. You have to assess it the next day. So I pulled them out, put them on the bench, and left them there overnight for tomorrow to check them and put them away on the shelf. So that was today. Good food and more canning for the shelves, and the shelves are getting pretty full at the moment. We need to rearrange those a little bit, I think. And more of that lard. So I was really excited. Oh, I forgot to mention that on our marinara pasta, I fried up some of those lard crumbles, the cracklings, and fried them up so that they were kind of crunchy, and sprinkled them over the top of the pasta as well for a little bit of texture in the pasta, with a little bit of salt. When I fried them up, I put a little bit of salt in them as well. There is a mosquito flying around my face, excuse me. So I added a bit of salt while they fried them off, and then sprinkled them over the pasta, and ended up having that lovely salty texture over the top, a bit like having Parmesan cheese or croutons or whatever else, since we don't do dairy. So that was dinner. But anyway, I will see you again on the next video. Thanks guys for watching.